let's move on to the LessWrong posts then.
All right. Well, first up, we've got heat versus motion.
Okay, this one was interesting because they're all interesting. I feel like I start way too many of the LessWrong posts. This one was interesting.
It's the trap of a lot of them being so interesting.
It really is. How dare he write so much interesting content? But it reminded me, we all know that heat is just molecular motion, right? But people did not know that in the past. But near the beginning it says, suppose you'd separately studied kinetic theory and caloric theory. Because he's talking about how before we knew what heat actually was, there was a theory of how things move, kinetic theory, and theories of why things are hot, caloric theory. You know now something about kinetics: collisions, elastic rebounds, momentum, kinetic energy, gravity, inertia, free trajectories. Separately, you know something about heat: temperatures, pressures, combustion, heat flows, engines, melting, vaporization. And this just it kind of miniature blew my mind reading that, because you look at those and that's all of motion is that stuff that he said, like collisions and gravity and inertia. And it has absolutely nothing to do with heat. And then you read the heat things and it's like temperature and pressure and melting. And I'm like, none of that has anything to do with motion. My God, of course people thought they were two different things. Why would you think anything else? It's just intuitive that they're not the same thing.
Yeah, and later on he goes on to talk. He gives some examples about what moving is, and we have different words for heat and motion because they mean two different things. Heat melts things, and motion
moves things.
Yeah, things going from place to place and changing position and yada yada. He uses this example because I think the previous post was angry atoms, and he says that this was a much simpler example of reductionism.
Have you heard the recent Sam Harris podcast?
Yes.
The one about consciousness?
Oh, you know what? I don't know if I finished that one yet. I thought you meant the one that came out a few days ago about politics stuff.
No.
No, I haven't listened to the consciousness one yet.
It's kind of what I expected, which is why I put it on to help me fall asleep.
Wow.
But I know, I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. Whatever it takes.
One of the times near the beginning of when I was, going to fall asleep, and so I was still the words were still filtering into my brain. The philosophy professor, I think he was, that he has on there, literally says, there's no way for feelings to arise out of just atoms and motion. And I was like, oh my God, he's literally right this day and age talking about the whole angry atoms problem, that, atoms don't have angriness. And it was just so interesting to see that almost 20 years later, there's still people who are, legit tenured professors struggling with angry atoms.
Yeah, now I'm curious. So the guest was Christoph Koch, and I'm going to listen to this now because I'm really hoping Sam pushed back on that. Because the response is, of course there is, because it does. Right?
Well, Sam did not push back very much, but there was so much they were talking about in a very broad scatter thing. I don't think he had a chance to push back on a lot of things.
Yeah, Sam, I think he does the world a service by making his podcasts actually constrained. Some of the longer ones can run over 2 hours, but he doesn't do the Joe Rogan or Lex Friedman thing of just talking for 7 hours, which, gives people a chance to push back on literally everything. But yeah, well, some philosophers are still confused.
Yeah, but sorry, yes, back to heat and motion. Did you not also, when you were reading that, suddenly realize, oh my God, they are such two terribly different things, and how crazy is it that we somehow figured out that they're the same thing?
I didn't have the mind-blowing thing, at least as much as yours. For me, it just really painted a picture for why it is valuable that we have two different words for these two different levels of abstraction.
Okay.
It wouldn't make sense to talk about, I happened to be driving when I was listening to this post. And so, I wasn't thinking about my car's movement from my house to the gym in terms of, heat flows and pressure and temperature and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Even though all of that is happening, I was thinking about it more in terms of things changing places, which is what I was trying to do at the time. So it's illustrative. I think the hands and fingers really is my favorite example. If I was trying to think of the easiest way to reduce, to explain reductionism to somebody, I definitely wouldn't go here. But he's doing deeper. He's trying to talk about this is a follow-up to angry atoms, which is all right, how do we get high level stuff out of atoms? Hands and fingers are still at least all big enough for us to see.
Right. I would definitely start with hands and fingers, and then I would move on to heat being motion, because that's the part where I feel a lot of people are right on the border. I'm certainly right on the border of understanding that, because it doesn't feel intuitive to me. Like, I know that heat is the motion of molecules, but, well, I guess we'll get to the last line that I pulled out at the bottom. But like, I couldn't tell you exactly how those two translate between each other. So he's saying, imagine you are one of these people in the 1800s or whenever it was, where they have both kinetic theory and caloric theory. A physicist from the future comes along and tells you, where there is heat, there is motion, and vice versa. That's why, for example, rubbing things together makes them hotter. Then he posits two possible people responding to that in the way that he talks about both angry atoms and hands and fingers, and whenever people fight against reductionism, these are the two most common things that he says he runs into. Thinker number one says, nonsense, the words heat and motion have two different meanings. That's why we have two different words. Heat is concerned with change of substance, whereas motion is concerned with change of position and shape. To say they have the same meaning is simply to confuse yourself. Which, I mean, it's true that we have two different words, because on our macro level, they address two different observable phenomena, but that doesn't mean that they don't reduce down to the same thing in reductionism if you go deep enough. His answer to that is, you can say my beliefs about heat and motion are not the same beliefs, but it's possible that actual heat and actual motion are the same thing. It's like being able to acknowledge that the morning star and the evening star might be the same planet, while also understanding that you can't determine this just by examining your beliefs. You've got to haul out the telescope.
Yeah, I have nothing to add.
Yeah.
You've got to just go out there and look sometimes, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Thinker 2 comes back with a retort that I think is worth digging into for a bit.
Yes.
Yeah, so Thinker 2 says, impossible. It may be that in our world, heat and motion are associated by bridging laws, which that's always a red flag for me.
Okay.
I mean, that's the same sort of, hand-wavy bullshit you get when it's like, well, how does the brain interact with the soul?
Right. Yeah.
And so it
bridges the material with the spiritual.
Yeah. Something, pineal gland.
Antenna.
Yeah. So there may be bridging laws so that the law of physics that motion creates caloric and vice versa. But I can easily imagine a world rubbing things together does not make them hotter, and gases don't exert more pressure at higher temperatures. Since there are possible worlds where heat and motion are not associated, they must be different properties. This is true a priori.
We run into this thing a lot, don't we? Where people say, because I can't imagine a possible world, that means something. I mean, I'm thinking specifically, since we're coming up hot on the zombies thing, where David Chalmers and a lot of zombie proponents say, I can imagine a world where people are down to the atom identical, and yet they are not conscious, and therefore that is something important to know. I'm thinking also about Bentham's bulldog, and a lot of ontological arguments who say, well, I can imagine that a god is a perfect being and perfect beings exist, therefore that means something. Like, just because you can imagine something does not say anything about the real world, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I looked up just to confirm, because Eliezer mentions in the post, Hillary Putnam, once we've discovered that water in the actual world is H2O, nothing counts as a possible world in which water isn't H2O. It's conceivable, but it isn't logically possible. Conceivability is no proof of logical possibility.
Yes.
I remember there's a thought experiment about an opposite Earth where water is, instead of H2O, it's XYZ, and everything else is the same. And I actually came across this argument recently when I was talking with Claude about actually some of the anthropic arguments discussed by Bentham's bulldog. And long story short, well, actually, one quick footnote. I was disappointed just now to learn that Hillary Putnam wasn't a woman, because historically women don't get a lot of contribution to philosophy, but Hillary was just a guy with a girl's name in the 70s.
Okay.
Anyway, like the idea that you could have opposite Earth where H2O, where the thing that they say is water is actually this other substance, but the rest of the universe works the exact same.
Right.
Like that. But the thing is that that's totally imaginable.
I mean, I can imagine a lot of shit.
Right. So I think that's the thing is, like, philosophers talk about like logically impossible and then conceptually impossible. And that's not, like, if something is conceptually possible, it doesn't mean that it's actually possible. Like, a logical impossibility would be like, all fruits contain sugar, an apple is a fruit, apple doesn't have sugar. That would be a logical impossibility, right?
Okay.
And so I can't even conceive what it would mean for all three of those statements to be true. So like that's the kind of like just like boring ass logical proof. But I can sure conceptualize, a fruit that doesn't have sugar in it, right? Assuming that first statement was true. So it's one step past like logically impossible. But I think philosophers often get bogged down in like the next step, which is like, okay, but is it actually possible though? Is it actually possible to have a universe with beings like us, where when you put gas in a container and then heat it, that the pressure doesn't rise?
Right.
What would it even actually mean to heat it if the pressure wasn't going up?
Yeah.
It's not clear to me what that means.
I mean, at that point, you aren't talking about real things anymore, I guess.
Yeah.
I have yet to find a good way to talk to people who say, because I can't imagine it, therefore it is something that must be entertained.
I'm sure there's some more clever version of this retort, but something along the lines, you might just say something like, well, I can imagine a world where this conversation doesn't continue.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It's rude and dismissive, and I don't think that's actually helpful, but if they're insistent on that point, or you could say, I can imagine a world where what you're saying is impossible. So clearly us being able to imagine stuff isn't really a useful crux here.
Hopefully people will learn to do that less as they become better rationalists, perhaps by going to Guild of the Rose classes, or perhaps by reading sequences more. Who knows?
Or maybe even listening to this podcast.
Or maybe even that, yes.
There's one line in here that I wanted to grab, and I won't rabbit hole us on this too long, but it's something I've been thinking about for quite a bit of the last few weeks, and maybe I'll write something long at the end of it, but Yudkowsky says, suppose tomorrow's physicists stepped forward and said, our popularizations of science have always contained one lie. Actually, heat has nothing to do with motion. Could I prove they were wrong?
Yeah, that kind of got me. Because, no. I don't know. Well, I don't know.
I think I've rubbed two sticks together long enough and they made fire. I don't know how you'd explain that without the motion being somehow responsible for the heat,
Yeah, but then you could say something like, there's a law of physics that when their two things are in motion against each other, they create caloric, which is, the property of being hot.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, yeah, then I don't know how to respond to that person. But the rabbit hole that I'm going to point to and not dive into is like, actually, you mentioned Sam Harris earlier. He mentioned this same bit years ago. Nate Bargatze is a comedian. And years ago, he had a line about how he's like, I'm dumb. Like, if I was transported back in time, I'd have no way of convincing them I'm from the future. And it occurs to me that, like, I really don't either. Like, unless I was allowed to bring my stuff with me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know enough history to be able to be like, oh, yeah, this king's going to die on this day or something, right?
Right.
And so I'm like, well, I do know, like, a smidgen of science. Like, could I actually demonstrate anything? And then I'm thinking about, like, the stuff. I said I wouldn't dive into this hole, but I'll dive into it later. But long story short, I don't know. I think it's a much harder task to prove you're from the future, like, depending on who you get to talk to and how much you know. But like me knowing that light bulbs can exist is not enough for me to demonstrate that I know anything, to somebody 300 years ago.
Yeah. And even like so much of the science that we do is dependent on so many other things that even if you did know how to do some science and how to do some experiments, you couldn't necessarily do it at all. There's a old sci-fi book called Janissaries by, I think it was by Pornell and Niven, old masters of sci-fi back in like the 60s, 70s. But basically, some American Vietnam soldiers get thrown into a medieval society. They are doing great as long as their bullets don't run out, but they only got the ones that they brought with them. One of the guys that gets thrown back is a great deal of scientific knowledge, and he's basically trying to create some sort of primitive gunpowder. He does manage to do it by the end of the book, spoiler alert, but he basically calls it his Manhattan Project because it takes like so many resources and gathering up like sulfur from mines and collecting manure or whatever and getting these people to like find a way to distill it. Like, he doesn't know exactly how to distill it. He knows the basic things. And so like it's a months-long project just to get some really crude basic black powder that you can like put in a cask to get it to blow up. And I couldn't even do that. But regardless, like what could we do? Like, try to recreate the scientific process and start with early experiments with primitive tools, and maybe we could do a few little tricks to impress people, and they're like, yeah, that's great, but the court magician can make frogs disappear.
Yeah, me being able to like make a magnet with a copper wire maybe wouldn't be or with a copper wire into electricity wouldn't be all that exciting if the magician can, like you said, pull rabbits out of hats and stuff. Yeah, well, I'll have to think about it.
Yeah, it's a really good line, because I'm sure with the internet and an afternoon to research it, I could find out a way to maybe prove that they're wrong. Maybe. And I certainly couldn't do it if it was, if it was just left to my own devices. And that sort of means that I don't entirely completely understand it at the basic level, right?
Oh, I definitely don't completely understand it at the basic level. Like, it's a drag because I know enough to take an AP chemistry course, but like I don't know enough to just of like the base level science. I might grab this last bullet point here because I think it ties it up really well.
Great.
He says it takes a great deal of detailed knowledge to get yourself to the point where you can no longer conceive of a world where the two phenomena go separate ways. Reductionism isn't cheap, and that's why it buys so much.
It's a great line.
Yeah. I think he's spot on there. And the things I wanted to highlight was, again, the detailed knowledge. Like, I have knowledge of these things, right?
Yeah.
I know some stuff. I could call bullshit on some people's proposed experimental outcomes or something, right? If they were if it was like a multiple choice test or something. But I couldn't, immediately tell you like how I would unless depending on what kind of excuses the scientists are allowed to come up with. I think that the stick thing might prove them wrong, but yeah, I'd have to think of more experiments. It does show that, like, yeah, just knowing the high level stuff isn't enough. If you really want to understand the nitty gritty, it does take a great deal of detailed knowledge.
Yeah, and I do think this is a thing that will cause people to sometimes find less enjoyment in fiction. Once you have a certain amount of knowledge, I believe Eliezer in one of the earlier posts talked about a story he read where what was it? Matches wouldn't work anymore when the guy got transported to a different world. And he was like, that breaks all of atomic physics. And if matches don't work anymore, you can't breathe anymore.
Right. It was something like, phosphorus doesn't behave the same or something. And then he's like, that's the same, like, stuff that's responsible in is it ATP? One of the chemicals involved in metabolism of your cells.
The P in ATP is phosphorus.
Oh, there we go. You knew more. You knew more details than I did.
Okay,
but yeah, that's another one of those things. It's like, yeah, I can conceive of a world, surely, right? This author clearly did. They wrote a story about it, but you can't just have that and have everything else be the same and pretend like it's possible.
Yeah,
right. If you want to say it's just magic, sure, magic, anything goes.
It can be frustrating. I think this is why world building is so important to rationalists, because if you write a story in a world that just like flat on its face is like, how could this even possibly work? Like, where did these people's food come from? It kind of breaks the story for you. The more you know, the more people have to work hard to make a story seem believable to you, I guess.
Yeah, and it also depends on like how much of the enjoyment of the story comes from the world building. Like in the canon Harry Potter series, the Weasleys were poor and they like literally had struggled to feed their family.
Yeah,
and it's not clear for why that would be true for any reason, right? But that wasn't the point of them being poor in the original story. Like, it was to have a poor class of person to counteract the Malfoys, and
I guess
have the Weasleys also be from humble backgrounds like Harry. But MOR delightfully gave us an awesome answer of like, oh yeah, you can't transfigure gold because the goblins will kill you, and you can't transfigure food because it'll turn back into what it wasn't before, and that'll kill you. So like, those are really good answers, and it's a lot of fun. Yeah, I agree. I think to the extent that the enjoyment of your story leans on the world building being good, it's essential.
Yeah,
that's what I think what makes like reading Ratfic so much fun. Is like, did they think of this? Oh fuck yes, they did. Look at that. That was awesome.
Yeah, I don't need people to think of everything, but just like sometimes when something would so obviously not work at all, it kind of throws you out of the story.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the most fun things of Worth the Candle is, our protagonist is always looking for holes and ways to munchkin. It's like, no, the world designer thought of this too.
Mm-hmm.
And when they didn't, they fix it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. But back to the LessWrong post. Yes, as he says, reductionism isn't cheap. It's hard to know these things, and that's why it's so powerful.
Yeah. And then we've got a fun second post here. Brain breakthrough. It's made of neurons. And
yeah,
there isn't much of this. It's a fun, short news press example of, well, go ahead and you take the reins.
I only pulled out one quote from one bullet point from this post. It was, "We have found an enormously complicated material system located where the mind should be. The implications are shocking and must be squarely faced." And basically the post is this. It's a lot of people shocked to find out that the place where people think and where that affects their personalities and their memories and stuff looks to just be a whole bunch of little itty bitty tiny cells that are connected to each other with even smaller little tendrils. And how the fuck is that possible? What the fuck does this mean?
I mean, and I think there's a few things to take from this post, other than like just the funniness of what it would mean for this to be a headline. But one of the interesting things is that, like, to me, if I'm the person reading this headline, I believed that the brain was an organ much like maybe the liver or something. And now I know it's made of smaller stuff. Well, what difference does that make to me, right?
Yeah.
It's made of smaller stuff. Go on, keep being a brain. So like from the outside, it stays all the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have much else to add on this one. It's a 2-minute read. It's funny.
Yeah, I guess it's supposed to help put us in the mind of people who don't believe in materialism, I guess, who then find out that the mind is just made out of a material artifact.
Yeah, and I mean, the second to last paragraph, much of the work remains to be done discovering the specific identities between electrochemical interactions between neurons and thoughts. Nonetheless, we believe that our discovery offers the promise, though not yet the realization, of a full scientific account of thought. The problem may now be declared, if not solved, then solvable.
Nice.
To me, what's funny about that is that this doesn't actually like get you that much further. Maybe that's a joke. Like that's one of the jokes in this post.
Oh,
like,
okay, yeah.
Saying, hey, it's made of smaller stuff doesn't actually help you figure out like where the thoughts and like, if I've got one big ball called the brain and I say it has thoughts in it, and then someone says, no, that big ball is made of smaller neurons. I'm like, well, there's still thoughts in there, right? Yeah. All right. Well, how does that work? Well, we still don't know. I mean, the only thing I can tell you is that it's part of the brain and not all of it at the same time, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, that's it for this one. Next week, or next episode rather, we've got Reductive Reference and Zombies? Wait, Zombies? Did I say that correctly? First, Zombies has no exclamation mark. The second one has a question mark.
Yes. I'm glad we're about to get into these because these are some of the most crazy hair-pulling things in my opinion. The people who believe in zombies.
I'll do some extra credit research and figuring out like what do people like Chalmers and stuff have. How do they reply to this sort of zombieism argument?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, because the argument against it is so fucking clear that I don't know how they still come up with this. So I'm going to try and find like the newest, best arguments in favor of zombieism. And
excellent.
I'll bring that to the table next episode.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, it'll be fun.